Thank you so much for being with us. We have a really nice presentation for you this evening, I think. My name is Kim Porter. This is our fourth in a series of online programs we're hosting every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. I wish I could ask for a show of hands to ask if you've ever been to any of our programs before. Our organization is called Be a Part of the Conversation. You obviously found us, so hopefully you'll find our website too, which has a lot of really helpful information. I hope you'll visit that. We're really looking forward to being back with all of you live and in person, but for now, we are rolling with this fabulous Zoom tool that we have. So here we are. Next week, we will be here. We're here every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And next week, we have a program that we're doing at the end of each month, at the last Tuesday of each month, called Pathways to Recovery. And each month, we'll kind of dig into a deeper area of focus for what we're dealing with right now with this pandemic and how we're rolling with accessing treatment and so forth. But next week, we're going to be joined by a really great guy named Don Sloan. He's a really well-respected interventionist. He's actually in Virginia, but he works all over the country doing interventions. He's terrific. And he's going to be talking with us. Oh, he's also going to have a couple of other folks. We're still ironing all of that out, but he'll have a couple of other people with him. But we're going to have a great panel discussion about navigating pathways to recovery with this current situation that we have. So just a few housekeeping items. As an attendee, you are in viewing mode only. So that means you're not visible on this webinar, so we can't hear you or see you, but we really want you to ask questions throughout this presentation. So as things are coming to you, as you're hearing from Caroline and June, feel free to use that Q&A box, and here I'm going to show it to you now. So let me go ahead and share my screen again and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this should be roughly what your screens look like. If you've seen this before, I apologize. I think it just helps people if they're not familiar with this. So you can go down here to the Q&A, hit that, and then you can type in any question anytime. And I'm going to introduce you to Tessa in just a second. She and I will be checking those out and making sure that they're all queued up and get answered, hopefully by the end of the evening. This is where you type in your question. You can check this little box to make it anonymous. And we won't be saying your names anyway, so don't worry about that, unless Caroline does it with her folks. And then you get your answer either typed in, or Caroline or June will be answering it. And then you have an opportunity to chat as well. That way you can, I say that you just want to chat with me or one of the other panelists. You can do that right there. And then you can raise your hand. If you click on that raise hand button, it turns blue. And then what that tells me is you would like to share your screen or at least your audio and ask the question like kind of personally, like so that we'll see you and or at least hear you, possibly see you as well. So if you raise your hand, Tessa or I will check in with you and say, okay, do you want to share your screen now and ask your question? So that is what that's about. I'm just going to ask you, if we share your screen too, this is where you would unmute, and if you choose to share your video, that's where you would do that. But we're going to ask you to not kind of worry about those other options down there. Oop, that is old. That is old news. We're done with that. Okay. Sorry, guys. Didn't update my little opener. Okay. So I want to introduce you to Tessa.
Hi, everybody.
Tessa Ricci is our communications director. She's just awesome, and I'm really grateful that she's helping me out with this. She's my wingman on these webinars. So between Tessa and myself, we'll be kind of keeping track of your Q&A. We are recording this webinar, but your questions are not going to be visible in the recording, and the link to the recording will be available tomorrow on our website. Tomorrow morning, it'll be there. Oh, I was going to show you, I'll show you something later on. We have a follow-up page for this. Conversation.zone is our website. Conversation.zone/isolation is where you'll see this video, and you'll see Caroline and June's contact info and bios and all that kind of stuff, and lots of other related information. So this goes for Caroline and June. Like if you guys have information you want to like say, oh, you guys really need to check out this website or this other thing I found, we can put all that on that follow-up page. So we'll have that opportunity to see that. So I want to get started with our presentation. So I want to introduce to you Dr. Caroline Fenkel and June Farlam. Caroline is the Executive Director of the Center for Families in Malvern. June is also with the Center for Families. She is a primary therapist there. So thanks for being here, guys.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. This is a odd format for me. This is my first time giving an internet webinar. And so I'm excited, but those of you who have been to my talks like Isolation, the New Drug of Choice, you know how much I live off of laughs and people being engaged and asking questions. So the more questions that you can ask and the more that you can give us any kind of feedback that you possibly can, the better. It will be a better presentation for you and for me. I'm going to share my screen to start off this presentation. My name is Caroline Fenkel, like I said. June Farlam is with me. June is a primary therapist at Center for Families. Center for Families is a partial hospitalization program that treats adolescents with substance use and mental health issues. So right now we are 100% virtual, and we will be talking about how that has sort of changed our treatment and our perspective and how kids have been handling COVID. But first, like I said here, make sure that as we're talking, you are thinking of questions and things that you want to ask, and you can just go ahead and type those questions in. Kim will go through them and stop me and ask any kind of question, and I'll be able to answer any question. If you hear yelling, that's my child who is trying to go to sleep right now in the other room. His bedtime is 7, it's 7:12. My husband is texting me, telling me that he's gonna fall asleep soon, but that's the background noise that you hear, I apologize. Which brings us right into what it's like working from home with COVID, right? So I think that a lot of what we're seeing from social media and people is, drink water and get sunlight, but basically you're a houseplant with more complicated emotions. And I think that tonight, what we're gonna really be diving into are those complicated emotions, where they're coming from, how they're really hard to deal with. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about what it's like to be a parent while you are essentially on house arrest. We are also, okay, something just came up. That's a funny, thank you. That's funny, cute. That's great. Okay, see, I just saw that chat, and now that makes me feel good that it says that that's funny, because now I'm gonna keep going off that. Okay. So, basically the idea is that these are really complicated emotions that we want to make sure that we are addressing those. And then we want to talk a little bit about what it's like to be at home and be with your child and talk about conflict resolution. I think that a lot of people are being met with more conflict now than they have in the past. Especially now that you can't really go anywhere when you are feeling certain feelings. You can't, go out to the gym or leave and go for a walk necessarily, and so these are things that we're kind of like stuck with, and we want to really focus on that idea of conflict resolution. And then we're also going to just talk about trends, what's going on that we're seeing, June and I, in our practice, and that will sort of lead us more into questions that you guys are having. So first, let's dive into these complicated emotions, because we're basically a houseplant with complicated emotions. So once all of the chaos is over and all of the anxiety is over, and we've all sort of had this freak out of, oh my God, we're all gonna be quarantined. What has come to really be a big theme in some of the research that's coming out, but really just the anecdotal stuff that I'm hearing from a lot of people, is this idea of grief and loss. And when you look at sort of grief and loss, you think about this idea that grief really comes in as the calm after the storm, right? Grief comes in and it envelops you after all of the chaos is over. And when you're sitting in quarantine at home, I think that we start to really recognize what it is that we've lost, right? So we have lost in-person fellowship. We've lost like the ability to hug other people or shake people's hands. We've lost gatherings, getting together for dinner, things like that, school and education, celebrations. So proms, weddings, graduation, plays, we've lost funerals. And this is really complicated, right? Because people who have passed away that even aren't not from COVID, et cetera, you can't have a funeral, you can't have a celebration of life for that person. And that's really, really hard. We've really lost our freedom to be able to choose what we want to do and what we don't. We've lost our jobs, right? We have lost loved ones to this disease. And really, we've lost the world that we once knew. And I think that that's one of the hardest feelings that people have really started to wrap their heads around. And it leads into an even more complex feeling, which is something that we like to call ambiguous loss. So ambiguous loss is the absence of presence. And the idea behind ambiguous loss is that there are things that are perhaps a little bit present, or there are things that you always thought were present and now they're absent. So the best example of ambiguous loss is losing your eyesight, right? It was present and now it's absent. Another really good example of ambiguous loss is being infertile. You always thought your whole entire life that you were fertile, did protective measures to make sure that you didn't get pregnant, and then to find out that you're infertile, that's what we call ambiguous loss. So the absence of presence. You thought that it was there and now it's not. And we're seeing a lot of this ambiguous loss. So it's not just grief and loss and the really cut and dry idea. It's actually an even more complicated house plan than what we expect, right? So it's this idea that we are grieving things that are still kind of there. We're going past our favorite restaurant, and even though our favorite restaurant's not closed, right, forever, or is no longer there, it's there. We just can't access it in any way, right? We will go throughout our lives and be like, man, I wish that I could be with my kids more. I work too much. I'm too much with our kids. And now we're feeling bad for grieving having to be with them and grieving losing, right, the ability to go to work. Even though we went to work every day and we're like, oh, I hate my job. This is awful. And now we're like, oh, I miss my job and that's awful. And, so there's no real winning. And we'll talk more about sort of how the pressure of what that looks like for parenting and things like that in a little bit. But I think that a lot of what we have lost has to do with this idea that things were always present and they're not anymore. Fully stocked shelves. I don't think that I'm ever going to look at a fully stocked shelf the same again.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I'm going to look at a bottle of Purell ever the same ever again. June, go ahead.
I just wanted to just go in there and Caroline and I were talking about this earlier, but a sense of loss that I feel like I've noticed that I'd not really thought about with my daughter through this. And I guess it started me thinking more about my identity as well, is this loss of, we think about, our kids are bored, they had sports, they had school, they had all these things, and now they don't have anything to do. But also, that idea, we've got these kids that were going to graduate this year that have worked and worked and worked for years to achieve something, and that's been taken away, that they've lost that. For example, my daughter's a climber. She competes nationally. She's worked on this since she was 4 years old. She went to nationals this year. That stopped. Training has stopped, and it's such a big part of her identity of who she is. So not only has she lost that kind of physical activity that she does 4 times a week and the camaraderie and being part of that community, and she is Brody the climber. And now who am I? What do I do? What am I interested in? And I think it's starting to hit her now as we go further into the isolation of, if this goes on for any length of time, I've lost that part of me. I've lost that identity. And of course, we hope we're going to get that back, but we don't know when it's going to be. It's that unknown, when am I going to be able to go back to being this person? And I think being aware of that loss of identity is really important, because like you're saying, Caroline, it's not a tangible thing. that we can think we've lost. You know, it isn't a person, it's not a death, but it is a part of us that we don't have access to right now.
Yep, exactly. And I think that with that feeling, there are two complicating factors, right, that make this even more complex. First of all, you feel bad for feeling bad, right? So like what happens is that in your mind, or let's use me as an example, right? I'm really upset that I can't go out and ride a horse. Okay. I feel horrible for having that thought. Okay. I'm talking to my best friend who is a psychiatrist that's about to get deployed to go and like run a ventilator at University of Pennsylvania. He's wearing a mask in with like the thing. Okay. My other best friend in the whole world is an emergency room PA in Lansdale, and they have like a refrigerated truck outside. Okay. Like it is nightmare. But here I am having this thought of like, I wish I could go and ride my horse. You know, like it's actually embarrassing that these are the thoughts that are crossing my mind, because I'm thinking to myself about the fact that I still have a job, right? And I'm still employed, and I'm so lucky for all of these things. And I'm sure, June, same thing for you. It's like you're like grieving the loss of your daughter climbing, but like, thank God you're not grieving the loss of your daughter getting COVID and dying, right? So I think that one of the biggest problems that we're up against that complicates things is that these very simple things that we love doing, it's hard for us to grieve them because we feel so bad that we're even grieving them, because we kind of have to also look at the idea that like we're so lucky that we didn't lose our job, or that we're not sick, or that we don't have any family members that have died. And watching other people who are so visible in the media that are risking their lives, that you have these frontline workers who are FaceTiming family members to say their last goodbyes to people who are on ventilators. I mean, like horrific things that you would never, ever, ever hope would ever happen to anyone. And here we are like, I'm bored in my house. What am I gonna do? I watched all the Netflix series that there are, like, you know, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why am I'm feeling this feeling, but I feel bad for feeling the feeling, so I'm just gonna shove it down. And I think that that's sort of, go ahead, June.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. And I think to that point as well is that, you know, that dilemma that we have, but what's important is the balance, because it's okay to be feeling those things. So we have that guilt. I think, you know, thinking of the kids that I work with, you know, that we work with, and they're feeling this stuff too. They have that push pull of feeling that loss, and, you know, feeling angry and pissed that they're stuck at home and they've lost, you know, graduation, or they're missing out on this stuff, but then feeling guilty because they look at the world around them. But I think it's really important that we allow ourselves, while balancing out that kind of gratitude and appreciation for what we do have and how it could be worse. It's okay to feel bad about what's going on for us right now. It's okay to have that grief. It's really important to like recognize those feelings and talk about those things with our kids, and to you know, ask them about these things and ask them about how they're feeling about it, and so that they're not carrying that guilt, and to be, it's okay to feel that loss. This sucks. It's okay. And for them not to, you know, my experience has been with some of my clients is they're trying to suppress that because of that guilt. And it's actually really important that they have the space and opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the second thing that complicates this is this idea that we really don't know the future. There's no real history that can tell us that this is when we will be reopened, and that this is when our life will be back to normal. We don't even know if when our life goes back to normal, if it will be like a new normal, like we'll all be wearing masks during flu season, or we will no longer be shaking people's hands when we meet them, or if like things will go back to totally being normal. We have no clue. And I think that really complicates this houseplant situation even more, because it really makes you realize that when there's uncertainty involved with the idea that we're on quarantine and that we really don't know what it is that we're going to be walking back into, that even creates more complex feelings. Mainly because once you add in the variable of being uncertain, it creates a lot of anxiety. You can't predict things. You have no idea what's about to happen. And I think that that's really, really hard. Okay, so so one of the things that we keep on going back to is this idea of quarantine, right? And this idea of being isolated in your house with either your family or you're by yourself. And the question becomes sort of what's so bad about that, and how can we make sure that it doesn't get too bad? And the answer is, and many of you I know have been to my talk, Isolation, the New Drug of Choice, which is really about this idea that the more isolated that you are, the more depressed that you are, and that teenagers in particular are incredibly susceptible to becoming very isolated due to technology. And so the question becomes, kind of this idea of, how do you get a rat depressed, right? We always test all these antidepressants on rats, and the question becomes, how do you make a rat depressed in order to test these medications on them? And the answer is that you isolate them from their friends and their family. And the idea is that a researcher came along to test out how addictive drugs are on rats, and created something called Rat Park, which was supposed to be a Disney World for rats, and it looked a little bit more like this. And essentially, he created spaces for the rats to create a community, friends, family, etc. They had food and water. And, then of course the rats did not need as many drugs as they did before. And I won't get into that. But the point is that what we know is that the happier that the place is that you are quarantined in, the happier that you're going to be. And the more connected that you feel in your quarantine space, the more likely that you are to not become depressed or anxious or have it. You probably will be depressed and anxious, right? That's probably like a normal thing, but maybe like not as bad, right? How do we make it not as bad? How do we cope with it, right? So the idea here is how can we sort of make a happy house? And one of the things that we study is this idea of belongingness, that when we feel like we belong to someone. Kim, how bad can you hear him? Can you hear him really bad?
No, barely hear him.
Barely hear him?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, really.
I'm just gonna have
much worse for you, I'm sure.
It's way worse for me. I'm sure it's really bad for Mike. All right, so basically the idea is that they took 850 eighth graders, and they concluded that feelings of belongingness led to decreased risk of depression. And most people, I usually ask in a group like this, when have you felt belongingness? And most people talk about this idea of sports, being parts of sports teams, going to church, being in your family, etc. There's a lot of things that increase feelings of belongingness, and a lot of the things that I just named aren't available anymore, right? So the question becomes, how can we create and increase feelings of belongingness? And we know that this also is going to be a protective factor. And the answer is that during COVID, we sort of all had this feeling of belongingness, right? Because we all there was this whole idea of camaraderie around, we're all in the same boat. We're all quarantined together. We're all doing this together. Nobody's going into work. Nobody's going to restaurants. Nobody has access to these things. And so, basically me and my friends just sent memes to each other all day, every day about, and memes are the best things ever, because they really help to show that we're all in the same boat. We're all feeling and thinking the same thing. And we all universally find these things to be really funny. So I think that it has brought up this increased level of belongingness, where we're sort of okay, we're all in this together. We can do it. Yet the question is, are we, right? Are we really all in the same boat with quarantine? And the answer is no, because you've got the perfect parent that's brought to you by social media. You've got your friends who are so I've been teaching my 6th grader 5 different languages. We've already started their Yale essay. We're just taking this time to make sure that we get the essay perfect. I know that it's going to be a while, but we're just going to perfect it. You've got your people on social media that are talking about cleaning out their entire house, how they're so grateful for this amount of time to really go through their old things, to be able to just do some house cleaning, just get things out. You've got your mom who's like meditating and doing yoga, like online yoga classes, and like, join me for my online yoga class. And like, you're like, I can't even get out of bed. I'm not going to go do yoga in the middle of the day, you know? You've got your dads that are, you know, doing like do-it-yourself projects with kids that are like, somebody posted a photo of like, they're like, of a dad creating a deck outside, and they're like, look, he finally got around to doing the deck. I'm like, okay, like, no, we're not building decks over here, right? You know, this idea of like everybody's on this like workout spree that they just are gonna like get in shape, and like after Corona they're gonna look amazing, and all of these things are just they're not necessarily true, right? In that this idea of, you know, when we try our, you know, our absolute hardest on any given day, I think that, you know, we're lucky if we can get through it, with having kids and, you know, working from home and feeling lonely and feeling disconnected. So usually it looks a little bit more like this. And this is one of my favorite memes that came out. If you're feeling like a bad parent today, skinks eat their eggs before they hatch, giraffes kick their newborns repeatedly until they start walking, harp seals nurse their babies for 12 days and then leave them stranded for up to 8 weeks to go on a sex spree, you're doing fine, right? This was like the big one that went everywhere, right? Because everybody is just like posting about how amazing their homeschooling is going with their children. I have a girl that I follow on Instagram that is literally every day she takes her 5-year-old out and they do gym time, and he's like doing push-ups with her, and they're both like in running gear, and like he's like doing like going like this and like, you know, the whole thing. And I'm just like, this is crazy. She's like, gym time with me and my son, you know, like, who has time to do that? And I think the problem is that we feel so guilty and so bad that, you know, other people are making us feel like, oh my God, am I taking this whole quarantine thing the wrong way? Like, am I not doing the right thing? Go ahead, June.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is, because I've definitely felt like that. You know, my daughter is doing, I'm surprised how little schoolwork she has to do, you know, probably 3 hours a day. And then I have this guilt or this feeling because I see her sitting around on her phone a lot more than she would be, and laying in bed longer than she would be, and not active. And I'm like, am I supposed to be getting her? She should be busy all day. Should I be filling her day with all these activities and getting her to do all this stuff? And I think it has been important and I think a structure and a routine is really important. But I also think because we're spending so much time with their kids and we are all in together, it's also really important that scheduled into that time is some time for, particularly if you've got teenagers, for them to have their space and for that to be okay. And, you know, we were talking about this, like, if what you're doing is sitting and what your teenager wants to do is sit on Netflix and binge watch something with you, that's okay. That's okay. That's quality time. That's connecting. And I think as well, the other thing that I've seen with kids that I'm working with is, you know, some of these kids are saying, my parents are just on me all the time to be doing stuff. Come on, let's go and walk the dog. Come on, let's go jog. You need to work out. Let's build this. Let's paint the house. Let's learn French. And I think all of that social media stuff puts pressure on us as parents, but that trickles down to our kids then. And we've got to be really careful to just about, you know, stand back a little bit and just give ourselves a break. It's okay we don't have to fill every hour of every day. We don't have to learn, you know, I know there's this whole thing about movement, mindfulness and mastery, but I think, you know, there's room for, you've got to allow these kids room to have their space as well, to be able to connect with their peers and have some downtime. Because this pressure that we feel under is only going to trickle down to them.
Thank you, June. It's exactly it. And I think that the more that we recognize that, you know, what we're doing is modeling that behavior, the more likely that we are to be the best models possible for our children. Okay, sorry guys. All right. So one of the things around this idea of combating depression and anxiety and grief and loss and things that a lot of people are feeling is this idea of gratitude. So, this idea that we are not going to look at hand sanitizer the same way, or rolls of toilet paper the same way, or washing our hands the same way, or fully stocked shelves. That gratitude is really, putting us, that this grief and loss, this ambiguous loss that I was talking about, is really putting into perspective that all of the different aspects of our lives that we take for granted, right? So one of the big things that I've been thinking a lot about is like having a workspace, and a workspace that's uninterrupted, or is just a workspace that I can go into and just do work. That's not possible for me right now in our house and in our setup. So I'm on our screened-in porch every day, and it's really distracting because there's like birds everywhere, and I've gotten really into birding. But we're going to get into a whole thing about hobbies because I've got some major hobbies happening these days. But basically, just this idea that I can't, like, on a rainy day, I don't have like a workspace to be at. And I think that that's really hard. And to think to myself that I've taken for granted for so long that I can like drive to my office and walk into an office that is going to provide me a space that's uninterrupted. Not all the time, but just overall is a place where I can go is something that like I'm now grateful for. I'm really grateful for my colleagues and being able to sit in the same room with them and talk face to face. The Zoom thing can get really challenging to be able to have organic conversations. And suddenly I'm so grateful for in-person conversations, especially when you're doing some kind of a roundtable discussion. So I think that there is a lot to be said for gratitude. And this idea that, creating a gratitude list, even every day, of things that you've always sort of taken for granted that suddenly are not. Going out to eat at your favorite restaurant, having a job, not having anyone be sick, having to go outside and not cover your face. These are all things that, we have taken for granted. June brought up a really good point earlier today, which is this idea that when you go into the grocery store and you see everybody with just masks on, you can't tell what anybody's facial expressions are. And that loss of like not having somebody smile at you or not smile at you, and that idea of just really struggling with not connecting to people, even just strangers who you make eye contact with quickly, that little moment of connection can really help us. And to not have that moment is really hard, I think. So one of the big things that we would really recommend, and something that I hope you get out of this webinar, is the idea of writing a gratitude list every day. June was saying that she wakes up in the morning with her 15-year-old daughter and writes a schedule out, which is always, I think, really helpful. But if in that schedule you write down 3 things that you're grateful for today that you didn't think about, and they could be like really dumb and stupid, like your pillow, or the fact that like our dry cleaners just opened back up, which was really nice. It's not an essential business, but I don't know, maybe they're going against law or something. So, the idea is that we really just need to focus on this idea that there are a lot of things that we have been doing and living and taking for granted that hopefully this coronavirus is really going to get us more in contact with. So one of the big things that I usually talk about with my isolation, the new drug of choice, is this idea of Camp YEAT, which we had at Center for Families. And the idea was that I created this camp, and I created it because all of the kids used to say YEAT, and it meant something that was positive, I thought. So I decided to use their own lingo with this camp. And we called it Youth Engagement, Adventure, and Therapy. We are running it this summer, God willing. I know that Sean would want me to put that in as a little plug, but we are just in the at this point in time, we're just looking at this summer and hoping that it can happen. So the camp itself is all about the idea of getting kids out of their houses during the summertime, getting them connected with one another. It is specifically for kids who have mental health issues or substance use issues or just any kind of depression or sadness that's going on. They can come to this camp and connect with one another, and that's the whole idea. The first day that we had it, we brought them in and we lied to them. It's always good to start off on a lie. And, you know, essentially what we do, I keep on reading these questions. I got to stop reading them. Okay. And essentially what we do is we brought them in and we said, look, we said, in order to keep your phones safe, we want to put your phones in this lockbox because we're gonna be all over the building. It's really important. Let's leave them here. And then at lunchtime, you can get them back. And every kid gave them in, which was shocking. And then we went throughout the day. We went for the next 3 hours. We had snacks. We did ice breaking activities. We had this cool parachute that like you used to do when you were a kid. Well, they have an adult version, and that was super fun. And essentially what ended up happening was lunch rolls around and not one kid asked for their phone, which is shocking because this is the generation that's supposed to be the most addicted to their phone. And here they are not even wanting their phone. They just kept on socializing with one another. And the idea behind it was that the more that you can connect people with one another, and the more that you can create novel experiences, and whether that is like with people that you know or people that you don't know, but it's the novel experiences idea that can really loop in kids oftentimes, which is this idea of doing things that you don't usually do throughout the day in order to increase connection with your teenager. So how do we connect with them? And we know that sort of listening is one of the first steps in connection, that the more that you listen to your child or your teenager or your loved one or your mother or your father or your sibling, the more likely that you're going to be able to be connected to them well. So as much as you can, sitting on your hands and listening to what it is that's going on with your teen or with another loved one is really, really important. We also always talk about this idea of communicating to one another. I love you, good morning and good night, and increasing those types of little communications as there are little moments and touch points for connection. Working together, doing laundry together, having TikTok parties, you know, and it's like a lot of parents don't understand TikTok. I'm like, I get it, neither do I. But the point is, I mean, I guess that I do. I have gone on it a little bit. There's a whole meme about millennials going onto TikTok with COVID. So like, this is what I'm talking about. We all feel so belongingness in a sense to things that like we all kind of like are doing the same things, but at the same time feel really disconnected from one another because we're not having shared experiences. So the TikTok parties idea is that you you did it, didn't you, June? You got them all onto Zoom or something, and then they shared a TikTok?
Yeah, I kind of came across it kind of by accident because it was my daughter's birthday. So, you know, she was like pretty down about how she wasn't going to be able to see her friends and her boyfriend and everybody. And so I did this surprise thing where I got all of her, you know, there was like 12 of them, and I had them all sign into like for this party. And it was like 3 hours they were on there for. And, you know, I think it's difficult for us sometimes as parents, like, you know, like Caroline was saying, I've done TikTok with Brody a couple of times and like a fool, but, you know, some of this stuff is things that we don't understand why they are so, this is the way they connect, but it is the way they connect, you know, and doing this, the memes and the TikTok and all of those sorts of things, you know, it is their language, it's their culture, it's the way that they connect. And I think what I've found is, you know, and working with kids that have a lot of social anxiety, they're not necessarily, it's hard for them sometimes to reach out to other kids. So we've got kids that we work with at CFF that are now really struggling because they don't have the opportunity to just be hanging out in the kitchen with kids in between groups and connecting. Now you're under pressure, you're in a group, you're expected, you know, everybody's looking at you, it's much harder, it's much more forced, those connections. And, you know, our kids can experience that as well. If it's something that's difficult for them to reach out to other kids, you know, I think that we have to let them do that in whatever ways they're comfortable with. And if it means having a TikTok party, then, you know, if you can facilitate it as a parent or encourage them to do it on a weekly basis. I also think getting something in as a routine, and I think you talk about rituals further down, Caroline, but you know, I know with my daughter, if I say, why don't we sit down and play games, she's just going to be like, nah, I'm on my phone. But now I'm like, Thursday night is game night, and it is game night. That's what we do. And it's setting that expectation, that kind of routine up. So now she just does it, and she kind of groans and then sits with me for 3 hours playing, Connect Four and Scrabble and stuff that, we only do at like holidays usually. So yeah, I think connecting with them as well on their level is really important. And TikTok's actually really good fun. I've seen Caroline's TikToks.
Okay, so I put in headphones because I was thinking that maybe I'm waking up the baby and that's why he's crying hysterically, is because so I hope, can everybody hear me? I'm good? Great. Okay, so yeah, what June was talking about around the rituals is really important. And again, the TikTok parties, I think moral of the story is, it doesn't matter what it is that you set up for your child. If it's gonna get them connected to other children, great, do it. Even if that means that they're playing Minecraft and you hate that they play video games, too bad, let them play video games with their friend. Even if that means that they're gonna watch endless hours of YouTube on Zoom with their friends, let them watch endless hours of YouTube with their friends. These are ways for them to connect. We're in dire times, desperate times, cause for desperate measures, right? So really focus on that idea. The rituals is always something that I suggest for families to do. We had a family in our care for a long time, 2 years, and every Friday they would go out and they would get pizza together, and the client would always get pineapple pizza, and every Friday he would say, like, tonight's pineapple pizza night, and it was just this very sweet, kind way for them to be getting together and for him to have one of his favorite types of foods. And it's one of these things where it just happened every single Friday night. So I think that what June's talking about around rituals is really important. So if you had Taco Tuesday, if you have whatever it is that you want it to be, make it happen every week, because it will provide consistency through this time, and it will help you to connect with your family members. Dine together or Zoom dine with their friends. Invite them to cook with you or find their favorite recipe to make. And then, of course, always follow their lead. So if they're into shooting hoops, go outside, shoot hoops with them. If they're into taking a walk, I'm like dragging my husband to this pond that's like down the street from our house, because I saw a snapping turtle that, I'm not kidding, is the size of a tire. I've never seen a snapping turtle so big in my whole entire life. And I saw him one time, and now every single day I drag my husband there, because I go, we might be able to see him. Today might be the day that we can see him. First of all, he must be like 100 years old, right? Living in this pond. Second of all, we named him Rex because he's like a dinosaur, so T-Rex, Anyway, the point is that he's all that I think about. And I just drag my husband. My husband's like, whatever will get my wife out of the house and walking around, I don't care. I'll go and see her like imaginary turtle that she thinks that she saw named Rex. So like, just treat your child with so, just try your hardest to follow their lead with things like that. So like, mutually beneficial activities, right? This idea of like, I'm blowing bubbles with my 1-year-old that I have, and all that he wants to do is blow bubbles. So I'm blowing the bubbles and it's funny. And then I'm taking photos of him, and then that's cute. So we have this mutually beneficial thing that's going on. When they're older, if you want to give the dog a bath, let's go and give the dog a bath. And, that can take up an hour and a half, just to get the dog, have the dog, like give the dog a bath together. But that's a way to connect to each other. Go for a bike ride. I don't even know, is bike rides, I think that they are legal, right? You're allowed to go out for a bike ride. So, go out for a bike ride, get some exercise in. So obviously we are going to be met with conflict. And, essentially what we always sort of practice when it comes to conflict and conflict resolution is this idea that Daniel Siegel created, which is connect and redirect. And I'm going to do a couple Dan Siegel slides so you guys will see. But essentially the idea is that when you see your child's behavior trending in a direction that you don't like, you want to always ask yourself, is he or she hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? You want to always decrease the drama. You want to always take time to cool off. You can always say words like, I'm too angry to have a helpful conversation right now, so I'm going to take time to calm down, and then we'll talk in a bit. Use code words. We are huge proponents at Center for Families with code words. We believe that essentially if you can use a code word in the middle of a fight and it can diffuse it for a few hours and then come back to it, it can be really, really, really powerful and impactful. We've used it before in the past. Code word has been like spatula, and the kid will say like spatula in the middle of a fight, and the parent will be like, okay. And they take an hour and they go and think about it, and they write a little bit, journal a little bit about it, and they come back in a more calm state. So these are things that really help with conflict resolution. But I just want to keep going with this Dan Siegel idea. This is what he says. He says, imagine the last time that you felt really angry, really sad or angry or upset. How would it have felt if someone you love told you you need to calm down, or it's not that big of a deal? Or what if you were told to go be by yourself until you're calm and ready to be nice and happy? These responses would feel awful, wouldn't they? Yet these are the kinds of things that we tell our kids all the time. When we do, we actually increase their internal distress, leading to more acting out, not less. And that's what he really covers in this book called No Drama Discipline, which is one of like the best books that's out there. And essentially the idea is that, you know, for a child or for an adult, it's extremely powerful to hear someone say, I get you, I understand, I see why you feel this way. That type of empathy really disarms people and disarms children. And then this is one of my favorite quotes because I think it's just so true. Connection. So you connect with your child to try and understand what it is that they're going through, try to explain to them that you're on their side, try and see if they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, and then you redirect them from the behavior that they're doing. So when he talks about connection, he says, connection means that we give our kids our attention, that we respect them enough to listen to them, that we value their contribution to problem solving, that we communicate to them that we're on their side, whether we like the way that they're acting or not. So this idea that we're still on your side. I was reading reviews of this book on Amazon, and a woman wrote in, she was a grandmother, and said that she's been really struggling with her grandchildren and disciplining them, and that she read this book and she picked up her granddaughter and she was acting out in the car and was screaming and yelling. And instead of being like, okay, you're going home and you're going in a timeout and this is not okay, she looked at her and said, you don't usually act this way. Tell me about what's going on. And her granddaughter looked at her and said, well, today on the playground, these two girls they laughed at me when I tripped and fell. And it completely changed the conversation. Suddenly, she was now opening up to her. She was connecting with her. She was able to talk to her about what happened with those two girls and be able to take those emotions that she was feeling, that she was acting out, and be able to explore them. She came at it with curiosity and asked what it is that's going on, or why did you do that? Explain to me more, help me to understand, because I'm on your side, right? I'm on your side. That's the big communication and message that we need to be giving teenagers and really anybody that we're trying to have, a good relationship with. Engage, don't enrage, curiosity, like I talked about. These are all just really important things. Dan Siegel is a god, and everybody should be reading all of his books. So just some boredom breakers of things that have been like sort of talked about with our kids is this idea of creating some more hobbies, meditation, getting into master class or TED Talks, increasing creativity, crafts, TV series, books, video games, that these things are all like not off limits. June was just saying earlier today that, the amount that her daughter is on her phone and watching Netflix would have never been acceptable before COVID, but with COVID, she's just giving her like she's just stepping back and just letting her do her thing right now, because we're all just trying to get through, and that's okay. And it's okay to make video games a boredom breaker, and it's important to try and increase the connection and communication there. But and obviously put boundaries. I'm not saying like let your kids do play video games until they're peeing themselves. That's like a thing, right? Where people like sit in a chair for so long. Anyway, whatever. So the point is that, hobbies is really big. June knows this. I've gotten into birding. I've gotten into rock tumbling. Does anybody know what rock tumbling is? I didn't know what it was until Instagram gave me an ad for it. And I bought some kind of a rock tumbler. And now I go out and I get these rocks and then I put them in the rock tumbler and then it makes them smooth and cool. And it's this new cool thing that I discovered. Got into film, got a camera that's like a film from the 70s, taking some cool photos. Now I want to get into astronomy. Like it's like, 3 a.m. and I'm to my husband, like, I think I want to get into astrology. I'm going to get a telescope, right? Like, it's like, we can go so hard at these different types of ideas of hobbies and things that we've always wanted to get into that we just have not had the time or the energy or the effort to do. And it can be really like fun if you take at it as a challenge instead of as like, oh, this is so boring type of a thing. Just to kind of switch things, and then we're going to end current trends of what June and I we're seeing a lot of. Truly, we were just talking about this. Our kids, the kids that we treat 30 kids. They're between the ages of 14 to 18. They're in they really struggle with mental health issues and struggle with some substance use. And they're doing fine, honestly. They're really not struggling that much at all. And there's a lot that's to be said for that. But I think that the thing that kind of puts it perfectly is this email blast that was going around to all the therapists where essentially, the government is like, this pandemic is worse than we thought. You should be really worried. And a person with panic disorder is like, told you. Psychologists. In fact, it makes total sense that you're freaking out. And a person with panic disorder, told you. The CDC, you absolutely must wash your hands after you do like anything. Try singing the same song, counting or timing yourself. And a person with OCD says, told you. It's best to completely isolate yourself from others. Person with depression, told you. If you see something in a store that's even like a little bit relevant or useful, buy 50 of them, right? Person with hoarding disorder, told you. So it goes on and on. But essentially the idea is that, these people who have been struggling with OCD or anxiety or have been obsessively washing their hands or have been struggling with depression, this has been their whole life. Like their whole life has felt like the world is imploding on them. And like all of the really normal people that I know that are like well-adjusted are the ones that are freaking out and having really hard times and calling me crying. And like all the teenagers that we treat are just like, hey, what's up? I'm like, hey, what's going on? They're like, nothing, just another day in quarantine, been hanging out with my dog, like we're like, okay. I'm not saying that they're not struggling. Don't get me wrong, they are. But, the point is that they seem to be more well-equipped to deal with feeling like the world is imploding than most of us are. And, this is my favorite one, activists. You should be enraged at those in power that could have prevented this, right? Person with oppositional defiant disorder, told you. So these are the kinds of conversations that we're having, like with these kids and people who are struggling with mental health issues tend to they're dealing with it better than I think most. So, the moral of the story is neurodivergent folks are normal people. We got this, right? Don't worry. So that is like sort of what we're seeing. We're happy to talk more, obviously, about like what trends that we're seeing in family systems, because we are still doing family therapy. We're still doing group therapy. We're still doing individual therapy, psychiatric, and medication management. So we're happy to obviously answer any questions that anybody has about any differences that we're seeing. But I think that the overall theme is that the teens that we're treating they're doing okay. So June, did you want to finish with anything, or should we just jump into questions?
No, I mean, I just want to like reiterate what you're saying. Really, I've been really surprised how well the kids that we're working with have worked with this transition, and you're right, some of them are really struggling still, but I think I've been amazed at how well they do. And I think they struggled when we first kind of made that transition and we had kids that didn't want to kind of come into those groups and felt uncomfortable. Now we have like most of the time 100% attendance. The kids are turning up, they're using therapy, and they've adapted to it really well. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I've been actually really surprised. I think that they're doing remarkably well considering.
That's it.
Cool. Thank you. So how about if you unshare your screen, if you don't mind, unless you feel like you need to refer back to slides, which you might. So I guess you can leave it up if you want to. Okay, that's good. Let's kind of get you on there. Okay, so First, want to start with a question that came in right away. Do you feel this might help people to have more respect for one another?
Do I feel like what might have more,
This whole
like,
coronavirus, the isolation, the being together.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things that I keep on thinking about, I'm trying to think of how deep I want to go here with this. So I think that one of the things that I think a lot about is this idea that I feel very safe in my home. And I feel very safe with my husband, and I feel very safe in our development and in our area. And there are a lot of people, especially children, who don't feel safe in their home, whether that's because of their neighborhood has more violence, or it's because there's some kind of domestic abuse, and there's a lot of other people who are in domestic abuse relationships that don't feel safe, and thus being quarantined is it's kind of unthinkable to start to try and put myself into their shoes. And I think that that has really helped to helped me to put into perspective that idea of respecting people who don't feel safe in their homes, and really respecting the idea that, like, I do feel really safe in my home, and what would it be like to not feel safe? And a lot of times, like, kids especially like our teenagers, for example, they might not feel safe, but they feel a lot of tension in their household. So going to school and going to the Center for Families all day is like a relief for them. So being quarantined during COVID is like really hard for them. And so I think that those are the kinds of things that I feel like I'm gaining more and more respect towards people about.
I would say
I don't
too,
know.
I think that when you're on these, like when you do family Zooms, like we do this every weekend with, my kids and my ex-husband, we get online and we do a check-in, and my son's girlfriend's on, we all do a check-in. And when do you ever take that kind of time to like be together like that and do that? And last week, Lisa Silk brought up this really cool idea. Her kids ask her parents every night, they give them a question for the next night. And it's like not a question, they give them a feeling that they have to, so like maybe the feeling is surprised. When was the time in your life that you were surprised? And then the next night, the grandparents tell the kids on their Zoom meeting a story about when they were surprised. And Lisa said, like, I've learned so much about my parents just being on these meetings. And as you were talking, I was thinking, we're recording this, but you can record those Zoom talks too. Like, wouldn't it be cool to come up with like questions for grandparents and interview them and record it?
Yeah. And just so you're aware, like, they have these services of people who can go out and take videos and ask the most obscure, coolest questions that you've just never in your life thought of asking older relatives. And basically, if you type into Google, asking grandparents questions, you will come up with like literally 80 questions that are so cool. I can't even think of one right now, but it's like, when was the first time that you felt feeling scared? And they'll talk about like being in war and like crazy stuff that you just didn't even know like happened, so yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's a great time to do that kind of thing.
So maybe we're learning about each other.
Yeah, and it helps to increase connection too,
right,
with their grandparents.
And someone said this webinar is so validating, so thank you for that. What about the language we use when talking with our loved ones in our homes, i.e. physical distancing versus social distancing, staying home versus lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, the way in which we talk to people about anything and the choices in the words that we use is really, really important. We talk a lot about this in substance use treatment, like a clean urine versus a dirty urine, or getting clean versus you're dirty, like that idea. And I think that it's really important that we ensure that, especially to younger kids, that we're really being consistent with the ways in which we are talking to them, but also that we're really focused on bringing positivity. We were just on a treatment team call with our psychiatrist, who was like, why are we calling it social distancing? That's so stupid. It should be called physical distancing. And he's an MD, he's an epidemiologist and infectious medicine disease guy. Like, he's got all sorts of craziness, but then he's also a child and adolescent psychiatrist. But he was just talking about this idea of like, when you call it social distancing, it just doesn't make any sense, because like, we're still going to be socializing with each other. We're just going to be doing it virtually or doing it from 6 feet away. So I completely agree. I think that changing language is really important, and making sure that we do that can really create some serious systemic change.
And I think actually one of our colleagues in one of our treatment team Justin was talking about the way that we talk to the kids in the program about, you know, the isolation and, you know, lockdown, and really, you know, again, giving kids the space to feel angry and frustrated and express the grief and loss that they're feeling, but also talking to them about this being a real kind of like, as a member of society, and, you know, that we're doing this for the greater good, and, you know, this is the right thing to do because it protects others as well as ourselves, and, you know, thinking about it in more of a global sense. So I think that's a really good point, the whole, you know, using different language to not minimize this experience, but also to not, you know, that the power of that language of lockdown, you know, like we're being punished or forced to do something against our will, and thinking about it in a different way is really, that's really, really important.
Great. Thank you, guys. Here's another one. I would love to binge watch something with my 11-year-old son. I can't get him off of Xbox. How much is too much? Only child, his only social time with his friends. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, that's the golden question, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. But the question is it affecting, like, so assuming that your 11-year-old is in school or has to do some kind of schoolwork, needs to sleep and needs to eat, is it affecting his functionality? Is he not showering? Is he not eating? Is he not doing his schoolwork? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then yes, it is too much. If the answer to the question is no, not really, but it's still a lot and I'm really uncomfortable with it, then yeah, it's too much. If you're uncomfortable with it, then it's too much. But if this is the way in which your son is socializing and it's helping him to get through it, do I suggest you to do this once we hopefully get back to normal? No. But do I think that it's something that could be one of his coping skills to get through this? Just like how apparently mine is just buying like tons of stuff on Amazon for my new hobbies that are happening. Oh guys, look, I got into scratch paper. Look at this. Okay. That's what I do all throughout treatment team. It's all that I do. It's like crazy, you know. I'm painting. Oh, I got a paint by numbers thing. Anyway, look, you know, you might want to get your kid into some of that stuff.
They were asking, like, I would love to binge watch something with my 11-year-old, but can't get him off the Xbox. So it sounds to me like they're saying, I want to just spend time with them. You know, I'm not hearing schoolwork. I'm hearing like, I want to be with them. So maybe it's.
Yeah, so honestly, I know that this probably makes you want to throw up to think, but have him introduce you to the games.
Right. No.
Like sit down with him and be like, okay, tell me about this controller. What is A and B? What is this? What is that? Like, help me to understand how much fun that this game is. Like, I'm ready to learn. Can we start a separate game and get away from your parents, but like, get away from your friends or whatever? And like, you and I just play, like, teach me everything. Yeah. And like, it will really help to increase your connection with your son.
Right. That's what I thought you were going to say. Cause I remember I've heard you say to a parent, like, no, learn Fortnite, do it with them. Like, it's not the enemy. It's
Fortnite is so hard to play. I tried to play Fortnite, not easy.
In your opinion, do you think this will carry a kickback effect, such as people trying to sprint back into integrating with others? I guess like saying the pendulum is going to swing way the other way, or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is all dependent, in my opinion, on the culture in which you're around. So like obviously in Texas or in Florida, if like they say that they're going to slowly reopen something, then like then like they do flee to that, and like people just don't listen. It seems as though the Northeast has been listening more to mandates that are important. Not everyone, obviously. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. I think that in this particular area, people seem to be really taking things seriously, probably because of how Philadelphia fared during the 1918 Spanish influenza. And Philadelphia didn't listen to any of the social distancing guidelines, and a lot of people died. So now we're trying to make up for it. But I think that, you know, do I think that there will be a kickback in some areas? Yes. I think, though, that if we do what Governor Wolf, it sounds like, is wanting to do, which is just really slowly reopen, and we actually listen, which it seems like we have done pretty well, especially in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. I don't think that there will be a kickback. Now, do I think that, like, once I'm able to have friends over, like, see, I'm not like a big partier, but I think that probably there are kids that are in their 20s that when like they realize that they can like have a rave again, they'll have like 3 raves instead of just 1 rave, right? I mean, I think that there are like things like that that might happen that could be problematic. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So Caroline, you've talked before about the parent role as a consultant if you want to break that down. And the question is, how do we reconcile your consultant role as a parent while watching your kid be super unproductive during this period?
Yeah, so the idea around the consultant is that from 0 to 7, you are your child's controller. You are controlling them. You are telling them what to eat, when to go to sleep, when to wake up. And, you know, you're carrying them across the street. That from 7 to 14, you are your child's guider. You're telling them that they have to go to sleep between 9 and 10, or that you're saying to them to eat vegetables instead of eating fries, and you're just guiding them. But that from 14 on, you are your child's consultant. They are to come to you and ask you what it is that you think that they should do. And then they turn around and walk away, and they can take your advice or not take your advice. I get into this conversation a lot during these Be a Part of the Conversation events. And I always have the parents that are like, well, my 14-year-old could never regulate his own sleep or his own food or whatever. Okay, I get that. Okay, 14 could be a completely different number for a certain kid. It could look like the kid is 18, and a 14-year-old could look like they're 5, right? Like this is all individualized when it comes to the number, okay, of when to start being the consultant. The answer, though, around COVID, number one, you have to ask yourself, am I being unproductive, right? So like the minute that you see your kid being unproductive and you're like, I see them being totally unproductive, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing that's unproductive that they could be watching me be unproductive and following my lead in some way? And if you're like, okay, I'm doing a lot of productivity. Like, I think that I'm not necessarily the one that's modeling this behavior. Is there anybody else in the household that's modeling it? If not, your goal as the consultant is to engage them. That is the way that I would do it. I would not force them to do anything. I would say something along the lines of like, you know, I'm so sick of looking at my phone. Let's go like outside and take a walk, like what Kim always talks about. This idea of, hey, like I see that you're playing video games, can I play? Hey, like I'm gonna run and do this. Do you want to come? Like just trying to engage them in ways. But I would not suggest getting into power struggles and being like, you're being unproductive and it's important that you be more productive and do more schoolwork and get off of your video games. Like now is not the time to be having power struggles in your house or having conflict. It's just not the time. If you want to get on them about being unproductive and like normal life without COVID, take them to some family therapy and talk about your concerns there. But during COVID, just try and engage them, be their consultant, you know, encourage them, but you got to also just let it go.
And I think you make a really good point about looking at the individual child too, because some kid, like my daughter, if she was a teenager right now, she needs structure. She is so much better when she has you know, a list of things to do and all that. My son wouldn't have needed that. Like he would love having like, he does love having free time, you know? And so I think that some kids probably feel a little more anxiety if they don't have their routine of going to school, of the things that they're so used to, and having this kind of like giant question mark out there in the future of like, we don't know what September is going to look like, let alone, you know, next year's prom or whatever. So if some kids are struggling with that, are there any ways to like sort of help to kind of get from the child, like learn from the child what they need? Like, do you feel like you need more, you know, structured things, or like times of the day that we do certain things, you know, maybe?
I think that's a good point. I think, you know, when you talk about being a consultant, like that's a conversation that I would sit down and have with the kid. You know, not that the parent is, you know, we as parents come up with a list of things that they should be doing every day and say, here you go, here's your structure. But just be, you know, just have those conversations about the importance of feeling like you've achieved something at the end of the day, and talking to kids about, you know, risks of depression, and boredom is not your friend, and you know, we've got to keep moving, whether it's just walking or whatever it is. And you know, having those conversations and involving them and coming up with a plan with them of what seems reasonable. Like if we have, you know, your daily structure is you walk the dog at 11, at 2 you work out in some way, and at 4 you do some cooking. There are 3 structured things that are in your day, and then what you do in between that time, obviously the school's going to be in there. But I think, you know, it can be as loose as that, but I think what's really important is that they're involved in that process, and that they feel like they have, you know, they have agency over it. They have, you know, this isn't my parents telling me this is what I should be doing and guilting me into, you know, feel because I should feel productive. So I think having them take a role in that is really important. But I think if Caroline, like as Caroline said, if they turn around and say, you know, and they won't engage in that, now is not the time to push
Right.
that.
Right. Thanks, guys. We've had this exact discussion in our parent groups. Living with addiction has prepared us for such a time as this. You validated that we are equipped to do this. Nice, thank you. Hobbies that produce something they could be proud of making, maybe even to be given. I think this is a suggestion. Yeah, something they can give as gifts. That's a nice idea. And we have a couple questions in the chats. So, yes, your take on social media and how it makes others feel is spot on. Makes sense.
Join me for my yoga class. I'm like, no, I'm not joining you for your yoga class.
I had my kids write a list of things they can do when they're bored. What should I do when they say they don't want to do the things on the list? I usually suggest chores if they have nothing.
So I think that this sort of goes back to the rituals idea, which is like, I would take that list and I would say like, okay, so Monday at 10 a.m. we're going to do this. And on Tuesday at 11 a.m. we're going to do this. And I would make a schedule with those things on it, and try that. Because then it doesn't give them a option to not do it really. And it really can help you to just create more of like, this is what we're doing, not like you choose which one, because then they're just going to be like, okay, I don't want to do any of them. June, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, just that I agree with that. I think that's setting those expectations, involving them in the decision making, and setting those expectations so that that question mark isn't there. Because for most teenagers, they're going to prefer to look at their phone if they have the option. You know, there are some kids that are very motivated and they'll be like, yeah, okay, let's go and play out, you know, let's go do this, let's go and do that with my mum or my dad. Yeah, I'd love to, rather than FaceTime with my friends. But it's unusual. So if the question mark is there, they're unlikely to do it. But if it's already part of the routine and it's something that they've identified as something they would like to do and they do like to do, I think there's a lot better chance that they're going to engage in it.
Right. Okay. Someone said, sounds like the old doctor, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Ginott, Ginott, parenting books. You guys familiar with those?
No,
Have to look that one up.
but maybe I should be.
Maybe. Someone said join late, but still got valuable information. Thank you. Would love to see this again. Nailed it. Show on Netflix for parents and kids. Oh, I think there's maybe there. Oh, maybe we need to show this on Netflix for parents and kids. I'm sure Netflix will pick this up.
I'm ready. I'm Netflix ready.
You are so ready. And someone said that you are so funny. I'm sure she meant both of you.
We
Okay,
killed that, June.
here's a good question, right? Should boundaries remain the same or different during the pandemic? Really good question.
I mean, can the person be more specific? Like what kind of boundaries?
Let's see if she'll give us more detail. And I would suggest for them to check out the recording from last week because we talked about boundaries for an hour and a half. It was awesome. Oh, there was something I was going to ask you too, not went out of my head. Oh, I wanted to ask you because I'm all about the drugs. Are you seeing?
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Just wrote. Yeah. Okay. So it says for a child coming home from treatment for substance abuse issues. So I think overall they need to be the same, right? Which is this idea of making sure that you have a schedule that's in place, ensuring that, you are, that they're going to a certain number of 12-step meetings or mutual support meetings, making sure that they are getting their treatment in that they need, not allowing them out initially, obviously. As far as like the phone goes, I know there are certain programs that say no phone for 30 days. I would not do that. That would be a boundary that I would let up on, because I think that when they're at home by themselves, if they don't have their phones and they're not going to like meetings in person where they can meet people, I think that it's important that they have a place or something to connect to others on. So that would be the one boundary that I would probably let up a little bit on. But aside from that, I think that a lot of the boundaries would remain the same.
Right.
Nope, there's not a follow-up.
Well, what I was wondering about is if you're seeing anything different from Center for Families with regard to substance use during this, through the lens of COVID-19 versus any other time. You feel like it's changed?
So we do still have kids that are relapsing, so they are having access to drugs in whatever way. I think that it's less because they're not seeing their friends at school or in other areas. So it's like maybe less accessible. I definitely have seen more urges to use because of the fact that they are sort of stuck at home with oftentimes parents that are triggering them and in high tension, high conflict households. And that's really hard for them. Right. But I will say that overall, it seems as though there's not a ton of relapsing necessarily. There has been some, but nothing like that we're kind of like, oh my God, all of our kids are out of control. We've only, in a typical week at Center for 2 weeks at Center for Families, we usually have to hospitalize or send somebody to a higher level of care about 1 to 2 times every 1 to 2 weeks, essentially. And in the past, 5 weeks, I would say we've had 1 hospitalization.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, people our population in particular are they have been a lot more stable than you would have thought.
There will be amazing studies about this, because I think you're right. I've been amazed. I was expecting for the rates of kids being hospitalized to really rapidly increase, and that isn't what we've seen at all. And I think it's really interesting. I think there will be real interesting. Probably Caroline will bring out a paper about
I'm absolutely hearing it from parents who are getting my number that it's absolutely a challenge right now because they're they're, still able to access substances, by hook or by crook. And also the young adult population is really struggling right now. If they didn't already have some kind of direction and purpose in life and all that kind of stuff, there are a lot of them, especially folks in really early recovery. And I'm hearing that from the treatment world too. And I'm sure you guys are, I'm sure Caroline, you're hearing that from Mike as well. It's a tough time, but I'm really glad to hear that your population's doing really well. A couple more questions. Boundaries stay the same. The enforcement or holding the boundary is what one should consider changing, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I agree with that exactly. Boundaries stay the same, but you have to choose whether or not you're going to enforce it or hold the boundary is what you should really be thinking about, right? So if the boundary is you don't have your phone for 30 days because we don't want you accessing it for, drugs or alcohol or to see old friends, okay, keep that boundary. We don't want them using their phone to do that. We want them only using their phone in order to get new friends or to reach out to new people, maybe even get them a new phone and a new phone number. There's an idea for you.
Right.
So I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree too. Another person, any ideas for reducing anxiety in children who may be new to anxiety due to these circumstances?
So that's really hard. I would say that if, they're suddenly feeling these feelings of anxiety, the first thing that's the most important is to really listen and to validate the feelings. The second part is to really help them to identify that these feelings are temporary, and that they're not permanent, and that they're allowed to feel these feelings, and that anxiety is normal right now. And I would really help them to explore that. So asking them questions like, where does it feel like in your body, or what's it like, or what is your mind telling you? And like really allowing a space and time to really explore that is really important. And then secondly, I think that once you have like adequately explored it, and you can do this every day if you want, how are you feeling today? What's going on? What's your brain telling you about this time? What do you think that what's the worst thing that you think could happen? Those are the kinds of questions that you want to be doing to ask them to explore that anxiety. And then secondary, you want to be trying to work on things that are going to make them feel better. So if a hot cup of tea makes them feel better, if a weighted blanket makes them feel better, if the only thing that makes me feel better is watching The Office on repeat. So that's it. I've seen every episode like 4 times, right? But like if I'm in a really bad spot, if I just watch any episode of The Office, I'll feel a lot better. So trying to help them to feel better in any way, there's something that's comforting for them. And if they can't identify what that is, go back to some childhood things that they might have found comforting. Was hugging the dog comforting? Was laying in your arms comforting? Was you reading them a book comforting? Like whatever it is that they think is comforting, really try and help them to create sort of a list in their mind of when I'm feeling these feelings, I can go and do this, this, and this. But it's very important. Parents oftentimes skip the first step, right? They skip the first step, in that they immediately go to like, oh, don't worry, honey, if we go and get you a hot cup of tea and like you just sit down and you stay here, like don't try and fix it, don't dismiss it, just listen and explore it with them. What's that like? Really ask them about that. It's very, very important to have that first part.
I love that. That's great. Thank you. Guys, have any more questions? Now's the time. We're just about at 8:30. And I'd ask you guys too, Caroline and June, anything that final thoughts or where you're hoping to see things go? Is this changing the way you practice? Do you think it'll change things for you in the future?
I don't know about in the future. I mean, we're having to practice slightly differently. I think it's for me, I think it's made me more focused, because you get this kind of window of time with the kids. When we're in the building, we're checking in with them all the time. We're seeing them around the building. We have access to them. They have access to us. We're being a lot more kind of mindful about the time that we spend with them, I think. So I think that has been different. But I'm not sure, Caroline, do you think it will change the way we practice in the future?
I mean, I just keep on going back to this idea that we have so many kids that are sick at home in bed, and like really what they are is they're anxious. And, insurance and licensing lifted these restrictions that we had around telehealth in order for us to provide what we're providing. But if they kept them lifted, we could give so much help to these kids that can't get on site, by increasing our telehealth services. I don't know if that will happen. Likely they'll put the restrictions right back up as soon as we're back. But I think that it's the only big thing that it's done has highlighted long-term the importance and the value of telehealth, and this idea that when you have a kid that's so depressed that they're school refusing to come to Center for Families, which we get a lot of those kids, being able to stick them in front of a computer and engage with somebody like me or like June would be just incredibly helpful. And I just think that like insurance and licensing are just behind the times when it comes to telehealth for mental illness. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully now that they've sort of changed those parameters, maybe they'll stay in place beyond
Yeah.
this. Really nice. And so people are finding a lot of humor in this rather challenging situation. Any suggestions on how to convince in-laws the quarantine is still in effect after the ban's been lifted? Haha. I don't know if we have an answer for that.
I like that.
Well, I really, really want to thank you guys. And, I'm sure you're both comfortable. I can assume that we can share your contact info. Yes?
Yes, definitely.
Follow-up page. So, folks, when we end this, you're going to have an opportunity to complete a survey. I would really, really be grateful if you would do that. We truly look at these to see what you want to hear about in the future, what kind of things were helpful, what would have been more helpful, other topics, and all that sort of stuff. So please, please, please complete that survey when you see it. You're also going to hear from us with a follow-up email in about 24 hours that'll have the link. But I'm just telling you, conversation.zone/isolation. That's the follow-up for this presentation. So once this is ready to get posted on our YouTube page, we're going to have the link for that on that page. It'll be there by morning. And any other, I wrote down, obviously, the No Drama Discipline with Dan Siegel. I'll make sure that that's anything else that you guys want to, Caroline and June want to share with me. I'll get it on that page so that we can share those resources. Okay. Thank you guys very much. And thanks everyone for being with us. Really appreciate it. Oh, somebody's buying a rock tumbler for the 12-year-old. Great tip.
Right? It's so cool. It is so cool. Get into astrology, birding, film. Yeah,
I ordered
that's what I'm into. Oh, scratch paper.
Right.
Fast.
Very nice. Okay, guys.
All right,
Have a
bye,
good night,
guys.
everyone. Thank you so much for being with us.